Hi guys, welcome to this week's lesson on art piece projects. Today's lesson is going to be painting a rose. We're going to look at the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, and the main point of this lesson is really about blending. How do you blend in acrylic paints? I think it's going to be quite a relaxing and enjoyable lesson. It's going to result in more or less an abstract, so I think you might find that quite a relaxing aspect of it as well. As long as you get the idea of blending, then we can go on with this again next week a little bit and extend it into a bit more of a painting of an actual flower. But today we're mostly going to concentrate on just the petals themselves and the blending, how to blend from one colour to another.
Colours I'm going to use are purple, red,
If
yellow and white, and we're going to arrange them on the palette. Red at the top, yellow at the bottom, purple on the left, white on the right. I'm going to mix these colours from the flower, mostly a sort of a peachy colour made out of mixing red and yellow to get orange. You see how I've put the colours apart and then I've mixed them in a sort of a sliding scale. Same with the white, so I get the peachy colours when I add that. And I've painted it all over the canvas before I started. And I've also just drawn a line about 1/3 of the way up the canvas. Now I'm going to draw a circle that pretty much goes outside or just touches the edge of the canvas, then another circle inside, then another circle inside that. Because the rose is not in the center, it's at the top, more or less. That little line goes over that line there. So the petals are more or less like a kind of like a bracket shape, or almost like a number 3 in a way, but more like a bracket. I smudge out the original lines a little bit so that they don't interfere too much. But the lines are just there to sort of guide us. They're not a rule, but they'll just help us not to get too lost in this rose, and that's a really easy thing to do when you're painting something like a rose. Now these little shapes of the petals, they're like the brackets that maybe the primary school teacher taught you how to draw when you were a kid. It's like a repeated shape that goes around and around, more or less following that concentric pattern of circles. And you can try to follow it exactly as much as you like, or you can just kind of get the idea generally. Doesn't really matter. Either way, you'll end up with a pretty nice painting of a flower. So this one starts from just inside the one below, and it still stays on that outside circle and goes all the way up to the top. It's a nice wobbly line. Notice how they sort of overlap a little bit. Coming down the right hand side, you're going to find that there's not so much detail because they're further away a little bit, and they just sort of end up being 2 or 3 little like unhappy face smiles, sort of like a lump curving upwards. So there we go. It's our basic shapes for the outer petals. The inner petals, the next layer is more or less the same. Again, that sort of bracket shape. But getting into the inner circle gets a little bit more complicated. Just try to think of the general shape. So this one's more sort of rectangular, and they start to overlap the central circle. So the central circle is the dark patch with all the stamens and whatnot on there, and these inner petals, they're a little bit more crumpled up and pointing towards us, and they're making strange shapes. So just try to get a sense of what each shape is. It might be like a triangular shape, or it might be a weird sort of a blob. You can follow those shapes, and if you think, oh, that's too hard, don't worry about it. Just go back to those bracket shapes, or just do like what your version of a petal shape would look like. This is going to work anyway because we're just really going to use the blending to make the petals come out, and we can actually make it quite abstract. You can see it's dark in the deep bits, light when the petals poke out. So in general, the color of the petals is a kind of a peachy color. Mix the shadow color by mixing the purple, which is a bit dark, with a sort of an orangey color, and we get this sort of murky, orangey, purpley, peachy kind of color. We get the light color by mixing more white in with it. And what we're going to do is basically going to Yeah, you can keep it a little bit wetter. If it starts to dry out on your palette, give it a spray, really fine mist. But we're going to put it down. This is the most important part of this whole lesson. Just put down the dark tone, the medium tone, generously, all of them quite generously, like putting Nutella on bread, not like putting Vegemite on bread, like unless you're Tom Hanks. Yeah, just quite generous amounts of each tone. And then you notice normally you can't blend acrylic because it dries so fast, but if you put a generous amount down and they're all the colors are wet at the same time, then you'll be able to blend them. You don't have a really long time, but some days it's more humid or cooler than others. But if you put down a generous amount anyway, the point is that you'll have enough time to blend it. And the other part is, the other trick is, don't try to do the whole canvas at once. Just choose a section and then blend it. So put in your darks, your lights, mediums, blend those. I'm using a pointy little brush. It's a pretty small canvas, so otherwise if it was a bigger canvas I might use a flat brush, a fan brush, or a kind of, a brush that looks like those makeup brushes. Sometimes you find you've over blended it. That doesn't matter. That can be nice. It can mean you've made it smoother, but it also can mean that it gets a bit the same. So you might have to come back and put in a bit more highlights and shadows, or strengthen up the actual color in it. Most of the color lives in the middle tones, where it's not polluted by the dark colors or washed out by the whites. In this one I've just picked up a flat brush because there was enough space to sort of brush it around. Now I've going back to the same process again. And notice as I'm doing it, when I'm putting the darks on, I'm actually going right over the top of those purple lines that I painted originally. In fact, I wouldn't normally paint such dark lines and have to paint over it just for the video so that you could see it. It's a bit problematic trying to paint light colors over dark colors. Okay, so here I am putting in some lights. So I've put in the darks, then I've put in the mediums, tones. Now I'm putting in the light tones. The color got a bit washed out on this video. There's a lot more oranges and purples and things, but you can see it at the end. I take a photo and the colors pop out a bit more. You can play with the warms and cools as you go along, but in the beginning, just mostly just think about the tones. The cools will be the red with the purple, the warms are there. So when you've got a little bit more yellows and oranges in there. Again, the flat brush is pretty handy for dabbing it. When I'm blending it, I'm also not always making strokes. Sometimes I'm making a stroke to get the edge, and sometimes I'm just kind of touching it lightly, touch, like that. And I'm not dragging the paint anywhere in particular, just kind of smudging it. So you don't always have to blend too hard. You can sometimes just put the color down, or the 3 bands of color or tones, and then more or less go along with the line that you've done. So just knocking back the edge and fluffying it out until it becomes quite soft. Okay, so you're probably noticing the pattern now, what's happening. Putting in the darks, putting in the mediums. Now this section I'm starting to work across a few petals because the space is pretty small. It's a small canvas. I can get it in a small slither of the canvas done across a couple of petals using the same colors, but I still don't go across the whole canvas. It's important. You'll notice it's pretty speeded up, but you'll notice I'm quite often washing my brush, wiping it with a rag, and once you put the colors on, then you really want to keep blend a little bit, clean the brush, blend a little bit, clean the brush, because you don't want to be dragging that dark color into the light or the light color into the dark and losing all your contrast. And you don't necessarily want to mix too much in with your middle tones either, because a lot of the middle tones, that's where the stronger color is. So blending just a little bit. Maybe I'll put the camera on my left hand side, the next one. Might not get that hairy arm. That makes it look like an orangutan who's painting this painting. Oh yeah, have a cup of tea. It's a good idea, or coffee, because sometimes the paint is a little bit wet and it's hard to blend it if it's too wet. I mean, it does blend, but it's hard to blend it subtly. So when you've got big chunks of paint, sometimes you need to let it settle down a little bit. You don't want it to dry, because then you're going to just end up with scratchy, scumbly stuff and nothing blends at all then. But sometimes have a little break and just let it be a little bit drier, and then you can do a little bit more subtle blending. So you might not necessarily want to keep on going and do this whole flower all in one day. There's a lot of petals, and it's the same process. You might want to put on some music and have a go and do half of it and do another bit another day. Now in the middle, so it is a complicated shape, but if you sort of see it as like a kind of a tadpole or something kind of shape with a big triangle sort of in the middle, maybe that'll help, or a kind of a swirl. You could draw a spiral with little bracket shapes, or number 3s going around it, or just your version of what a petal shape would look like, something like a teardrop. And I've kind of conformed to the photo a bit, just because I suppose I'm the one teaching this, I should be able to do it. But you don't really have to feel like you need to be compelled to do it, because in the end no one gets to come back yet generally and check your photo, and honestly, who would? So don't worry about it. It's more, you're just trying to get across the sense of the beauty of this particular thing that you're looking at. That's the whole point really. And also have a bit of fun, relax, enjoy yourself, and learn how to blend acrylic colors. So one thing at a time. Don't try to be a botanical illustrator here. Don't worry about the shape of the petals too much. So here in this part, what I'm doing is, I don't know if you noticed, but where it's dark, I'm making it a bit darker, and I'm making those dark marks, and then I'm blending that dark back out into the petal. When there's a light edge, I'm coming back with lights. I'm putting the lights a little bit stronger, and then I'm blending that light back out into the petal. I don't want to make dark lines and light lines. I want to make lighter edges and darker edges. And the difference is that a line looks like a line, an edge is more like it can be dark and then blends out, smudges out into the rest of the petal. The light smudges into the petal as well. So just pushing and pulling those highlights and contrasts, that's what gives it that little bit more 3D effect. You'll notice we're doing all this just with 3 colors: purple, orange, and red, and then we've got white for the highlight. If you don't have materials, you can order them online from Art Piece Projects. You can get a Create Joy pack with the materials you need for all the projects at this email address, info@artpieceprojects.com. Next week we'll be doing another project connected with what you've learned today. I hope you enjoyed it today, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, bye.